listening to Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio, the show that pulls back the curtain on the ideas, innovators, and institutions reshaping how we deliver, experience, and measure care. I'm Greg Masters, co-host and executive producer, alongside my partner in conversation, the ever-curious digital health aficionado, author, editor, global thought leader, and industry steward, Gil Bash. Together, we bring you the people, ideas, and movements reshaping healthcare, not with hype, but with purpose and persistence. Health Unabashed is where healthcare meets innovation, insight, and impact. We engage top industry minds to explore the future of health and wellness, from visionary thinking to sustainable models, policy reform to frontline delivery, and ultimately the real-world impact on public health. Today, Gil is broadcasting live from the Anchor Studio in Radio and Podcast Row at HIMSS 26 in Las Vegas, Nevada, where artificial intelligence is the word on every badge, in every session, and at every booth. But our guests today, Cheryl Pammer, Minitab's Head of Insights, and Mikhail Golovnya, Minitab's Senior Advisory Data Scientist, have been doing what everyone else is just learning to call AI for decades. Gil, the mic is yours.
Greg, I want to thank you for the gracious introduction. It's always very kind, and you've been working and the team here at Healthcare Now Radio extra hard. We're on the floor of HIMSS. We're actually in a very special place. There's the upstairs exhibits where my guests are actually seated from Minitab. And we're going to talk about Minitab, and we're going to talk about their journey to this great analytics company that is working in multiple verticals of industry. Actually, I think this might be, they'll correct me later on, their first time here at HIMSS for the most part. But this floor is dedicated practically to AI. And obviously, in almost every session I attend here at HIMSS, the conversation is AI, AI, AI. Minitabs actually has been looking at the sense of aggregated information and synthesizing information for quite some time, for decades, as a matter of fact. So the conversation of AI isn't particularly new to them. They've been looking at, when it was big data, they've been really tasked with looking at big data from the genesis of when we started to say, maybe if we had all this data in one spot, we could make sense of it and make really good informed decisions. And so to some extent, having them as guests, we're really looking at going back down memory lane in the world where data meant something. So again, this is a special show because here we are on the floor of HIMSS, and it gives us great access to some brilliant minds. So I want to welcome Cheryl Pammer, who is the Senior Head of Insights. That's a great title, by the way, the Senior Head of Insights. I imagine the other title was Big Brain of Ideas, but Senior Head of Insights is great. And Mikhail Golovnya, who is the Senior Advisor and Data Scientist. Now Cheryl has been with the company actually for 25 years plus. And Mikhail joined the company almost 10 years ago as a result of one of the company's acquisitions. And actually, he and his colleagues drew Minitab into the health area. So, first of all, I want to welcome you both to the show. And it's rare where I have people who are not specifically from the health area on the show. But in a way, I think, Cheryl, your journey and the acquisition, obviously, of the company that Mikhail was part of really speak to your core competency, which is insights applied to critical industry verticals. I know you're in manufacturing. I know you're in other industries, healthcare. So I just want to go back, since Cheryl, you're the veteran head of insights. Were you at the table when the decision was made to sort of bring aboard Mikhail and his colleagues into Minitab?
Yes. So we were ready to get into more of the machine learning predictive analytics world. Minitab has been in business for over 50 years, so we've been doing analytics for a really long time, but we were ready to move into more of the big data science world, and I am so happy that we acquired Salford Systems back in 2017, so much so that I left my home of 30-some years and moved to San Diego from Pennsylvania to be part of that.
So you're telling me that you bought Mikhail and his company so that you could move from Pennsylvania to San Diego. Is that the truth?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly why Minitab purchased the company.
I think you mentioned you were in College City or one
State
of the
College,
State
Pennsylvania,
College,
where Penn State
is. Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. And so you had to leave the waves of college freshmen coming in and getting nauseous on the sidewalks of your city from all those frat parties to moving out to the perpetual beautiful weather of San Diego. Now, obviously, Mikhail dug his heels in and said, hey, we're based in San Diego. We're not moving from San Diego. Pennsylvania isn't in our book. Mikhail, welcome to the show also. And also welcome to bringing Minitab into the health sector. I think it's very special. I wanted to ask you, Cheryl, going back, in some of the conversations we had, your company was involved in Six Sigma 6. Really many, many years ago, you were connected to GE, and that became an important part of your business. And the sense of someone who valued health information so much was so critical in terms of looking at, Jack Welch was really a pioneer in deploying insights to improve operational efficiency. So could you just share with us a little bit about the genesis of that?
Yeah, so back in the early 1990s, Six Sigma became a thing, originally at Motorola, but then moved pretty quickly to General Electric, as you said, under Jack Welch's reign. But one of the things we did at Minitab was we were the first company to actually develop software specifically for that Six Sigma quality market. And at GE, there was so much success in using analytics through Six Sigma in their manufacturing divisions that he said, hey, I want to move this to GE Capital, which then brought this whole analytics movement into more of a service industry.
Wow.
And it was really exciting to kind of see that transformation. And that's how things moved from places like GE Capital, which is service quality,
Right.
into healthcare.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, GE Capital, which in an earlier life, I worked with a piece of them that was acquired called Heller Financial Services, which became part of GE Capital, were very interested in the healthcare field.
Yep.
So GE Capital was interested. I'm just curious why you got into healthcare. Obviously, Mikhail can fill this in because you had to sell him on the idea to some extent of being acquired and coming into Minitab. But what was the catalyst to say, we really should be in healthcare?
Our focus has always been quality and continuous improvement, and we're all consumers of healthcare, right? So
all of us are. We're always people, sometimes patients.
So that's it's a passion of mine, right? I really, really want quality healthcare, and so it just makes sense that all these quality techniques that we were using in other industries, they really belonged in healthcare too.
Right. Well, look, you were looking at high performance. So Mikhail, I wanted to ask you, not so much about the acquisition itself, but the core services that your team offers. Could you talk a little bit about them?
Well, going back in time, when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's a very loaded term. There's a lot of different services.
Were you calling it that then or
No.
something else?
No, I've been in that business for decades, and we used to call it data mining, then we called it machine learning, then we called it business intelligence, business analytics, then for a while data science was a big term. Then we moved into deep learning, and then now we are in the AI. But AI itself is about a 50-year-old term. It was invented, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1950s or 60s. and it's accompanying the development of computers. So what I was working was known as a general area of AI, known as machine learning, which is a predictive side of AI, which is when we try to learn patterns from the past in order to predict something in the future, betting on repeatability or betting on essential uniformity of nature. Now, my traditional area has always been in numbers in, numbers out. Today, when people talk about AI, for some reason they think it's all about text, but the truth of the matter is we've just learned how to convert text into numbers and work with that. So that's what I brought on the table, and that's why Minitab was looking for experts in predictive side of machine learning, not just descriptive, diagnostic, and all of the related issues that was related to industries at the time. So once you step into predictive aspect of machine learning, that's what we brought on the table.
I'm very curious because when we take a look at predictive modeling, and we take a look at health services, and we take a look at Minitab's core competency, which is manufacturing initially, and we take a look at the health system or hospital system, we realize while they're not manufacturing equipment per se, it's almost like a manufacturing facility of supply chain where patients are coming in, whether it's coming in through the ER or through scheduled appointments into the hospital system. They have different conditions. Hospitals are trying to assess staffing needs, procurement of soft or disposable supply needs, management of their operating rooms efficiently, management of the ER staff efficiently, all of that of saying, how do we best use every element of the hospital system effectively on time, make sure that we have sort of enough infusion materials or sets for infusion or blood supply, whatever, surgeons on call at a certain time of the year. I mean, all of that is essentially supply chain management. Was that in a way what you were doing with predictive modeling and still are? Could you sort of dive into a little bit about the value of the data applied to the customer base?
That's exactly right, Gil. You start with having.
I guess I can get a job now at Minitab.
Yeah, you start with having the foundation of data. Now, there's a lot of talk about whether you have the right data or not, but you have to start with the data, and we'll live in the era when we are expanding the amount of data that's available. Now, people in manufacturing, people in finance discovered that they can use their data to identify patterns and use those patterns to predict the future to some extent. Now, in healthcare, there's no difference. It's just the change, the application is different, but let's say if you're interested in trying to understand who's going to be taking like the dismissal rates from the hospital or return rates to the hospital, or the supply management of certain medical equipment, or even if it's an equipment failure. So there's a lot of similarities between healthcare and what you get in general in industrial applications out there. It's just a matter of figuring out what those areas are and how we can help. And again, predictive, it's just one little aspect of what Minitab does. We do a lot of data management, we do a lot of project management, and that's right down the alley of a lot of people here today. They're all interested about the flow of projects or discrete event simulation events. Like we can build a model that mimics what happens at the emergency room. Incoming people, the people that are being released, the number of nurses, the number of doctors, different types of doctors.
I'm just curious.
I
imagine in the world of DRGs where certain procedures are reimbursed at a certain rate, you could probably study the effectiveness of the hospital system managing those patients who have a very set reimbursement rate for a procedure to take a look at gaps or where things are going wrong, and then they could sit back and reflect on what do they need to do to shore up the system and take better care of their patients. So I guess you're giving them the strategic navigational guide of how to be the most effective hospital they could be. Is that right?
That's exactly right, because once you have a model that captures the patterns and allows you to make predictions, the next step up is, I call it level 4, is to optimize the business processes.
Sounds like Six Sigma.
Yep.
Optimal level 4.
Yep. So level 1, describe. Level 2, diagnose. Level 3, predict. Level 4, optimize. And so once you have ability to predict, you can understand what's going on.
Were you using Six Sigma as well, separate from Minitab at that time? Or once you came together, you kind of like harmonized around language and offer and how you determine if the client is getting the best from the services provided? What was the turn-on point where you said, hey, we got it, we'll use that? Or, okay, we will use that, we understand. That's the marching order.
I learned about Six Sigma when I was a stats student.
Okay.
I didn't really use it in my main line of work, which is level 3 predictive. But certainly once we got together with Minitab, I've realized, okay, I learned about it before. So it's not necessarily something that's used everywhere by everyone, but we need to be comfortable with it to understand what's going on.
So, and Cheryl, you obviously have a great responsibility for the success of the business. I sort of sense from our conversations beyond health, you have sort of greater operational responsibility for the enterprise that's based out in San Diego. What other areas are you overseeing?
So in general, I work very, very closely with Minitab customers and understanding what their problems are and helping them to find great solutions. So I'll just give an example. This one's from healthcare.
Please.
I was working with the National Healthcare in Australia a couple years ago, and what they wanted to do was determine the best providers for follow-up care after surgery. And what's really neat is we took a predictive model and then we could rank care providers in terms of the most likely to be a successful follow-up versus least likely. So you get an ordered list of the best people to send best care providers to send people to after their surgery. And this is all based on patient demographics and what type of, a really full predictive model based on all kinds of things about the patient's condition and the demographics of the patient. Really, really powerful stuff. So I love the fact that there are that types of problems that need to be solved every day.
Just tuning in, you're right on time for Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio, broadcasting live from the radio and podcast row at HIMSS 2026 in Las Vegas, Nevada. We're chatting with Cheryl Pammer, Minitab's Head of Insights, and Mikhail Golovnya, Minitab's Senior Advisory Data Scientist. Stay tuned, they have plenty of game-changing insights yet to share.
So just not to put either one of you on the spot, heaven forbid, but could you share with us a little bit of, because head of insights and you're like using the raw material of data to sort of serve up the potential insights. Could you share like 2 or 3 of the big insights that you were able to provide a hospital system? Don't have to mention the hospital system at all. Just the sort of insights that you sort of said, like, here's some wows for you to recognize and begin to operationalize around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so patient falls is a big one, right? Everybody's following those. So I've worked with some healthcare systems on reducing patient falls and looking at beyond just the fact that we, applied some new techniques and whatever special socks to reduce patient falls. It's also looking at the key drivers of those things. And that's where, the world that Mikhail originally came from and I became part of was all looking at root cause analysis of things that can go wrong, right? Root cause analysis of certain types of hospital-acquired infections, for example. So it's really amazing the stuff we can do with predictive analytics to greatly improve patient care.
And obviously follow-on care you've talked about as well.
Yep.
Anything come to mind, my friend?
Yeah, and I would also add, you could study hospital readmission rates, and that helps the hospital personnel to find out the type of profiles of the people who tend to come back. And it could be sometimes fairly trivial results, but they're fully backed by the data, and that, depending on the individual situation, could be an important information flag for some people.
It's interesting. I was moderating a what's called a view from the top. It's like the key panels here. So I was moderating a panel with 3 real global luminaries on the topic. And one of the things that came out is the bulk of use of AI isn't really for clinical decision making. It's for operational effectiveness and efficiency. And it sounds like that's where you kind of like have sharpened the saw in terms of, you're one of those great enterprises that have brought in Six Sigma. How do we help you get insight around the operations of the system so that you're more effective? You capture more revenue. You don't have more readmissions. You're looking at the predictive analytics of patients who are more at risk for falls so that you reduce the fall risk. All of those things that get health systems into trouble and actually make them lose money in many cases. So it sounds like you're kind of in the sweet spot of AI, right now. Anything that you think about, because you've been doing this for like 50 years. The company, in essence, has been looking at this, whether it was GE Automotive, aircraft or turbines or whatever, looking at why does a turbine fail on inspection? What was that? So I imagine you have a sort of a wealth of predictive analytic data stored that you can reflect on in terms of applying that to best practices. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think the thing that's special to all of us is about healthcare is, again, we're consumers of healthcare. So while a manufacturing company might want to improve their processes and make them go quicker, I care as a patient that I get through the emergency department quicker, right? So We're helping both sides.
Right. Is there anything, on the emergency side, is there anything that you both have discovered where you sort of say there's an operational inefficiency here, and it is in the registration of the patient side, or it's on the triaging of the patient side, or some element that you've seen where you say, this just isn't working for you. Mm-hmm. You need to change your procedure on patient registration.
Yeah, I would say we've run into those examples. What usually happens, there is imbalance on the incoming side depending on the time of year, season, and not all hospitals they have the procedures to handle those types of scenarios in an efficient way. So it creates bottlenecks. It creates all kinds of red flags. So that would be one example. What I would also say, the biggest issue that we have in the healthcare and implementing this AI techniques is that the data is not well organized and maintained. That's one of the biggest struggles. So that's why we're actively promoting people to kind of realize, hey, we want the data that's a quality data that represents the actual operation.
So it sounds like you're almost like, you're Minitab consultants, but you're McKinsey-like consultants to say, look, you've got a ton of data. It's all over the place. Mm-hmm. You've got some data that you can utilize. You've got a lot of data that it's just not organized in a way that you can apply it and get insights from. This is our best practice for you. Is that on target?
Exactly right, Gail. I would summarize it as that a lot of businesses, and it's not just in healthcare, it's a bigger issue at large. They spend a lot of time and resources to collect the data they don't need, and they do not collect the data that they do need for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it might be expensive, sometimes the regulation might not allow you to collect some pieces of data too, or it could be privacy laws. But those are the parts that will be most valuable, and at least they need to be aware of it and stop wasting money on collecting something that cannot be used. So that's where we step in.
One of the things that came across in some of the conversations I've had during HIMSS is we think of data, and we think of data as sort of pristine. It's not, obviously. We think of data as perfect. It's not. And that this really comes down to leadership, human behavior, cognitive ability. The data are not like math or science. They're not empirical. They're just data. It's information. Mm-hmm. How do you separate when the client is saying, well, our information, our data tells us this, and you're saying to yourself, no, it doesn't. It's just a lot of data right now. It's as the expression goes, garbage in, garbage out. Mm-hmm. That's an old expression. How do you deal with that emotionally on their side when you have to sort of like pop the balloon?
I think one of the biggest mistakes we tend to make with data is we put the cart before the horse and we say, all right, we have all this data, let's see what I can glean from it. I think more importantly, we need to step back and think about the problem we're trying to solve and really talk about that. This is the problem, the business problem, the healthcare problem we want to solve, and collect the data that supports that problem rather than in reverse.
So it's basically objective, strategy, and then operationally collect.
That's exactly
Instead of collect, and then try to sort out, it's actually defining what data you want to collect before you begin the process of collection.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
That's exactly right. I back it up fully. Say, before we start collecting data, we need to understand the business problem.
Right.
And we also need to understand how we're going to address, how we're going to solve that problem. Is it going to be a predictive model? Is it going to be descriptive model?
Right.
Is it going to be Gen AI model? So once we understand the problem, then we focus on, okay, do we get the data? Or what do we need to get the right data?
Wow.
And that's the right way to do it.
I began a session I moderated here at HIMSS with a question to these world experts. I want to share it with you, which was very quickly in the 2 minutes we have left, sort of worst case scenario. Sort of said, I asked these experts, what keeps you up at night? And they were very candid. They talked about it. But I want to ask you the same question because you're really operational experts of helping a system, whether it's a manufacturing plant or so forth, getting it right. In a sentence or so, what should keep clients up at night?
I would say what would keep me up at night is when our users forget about their own intelligence and start thinking that artificial intelligence is intelligence and allow the degree of autonomy that will produce a mistake that will become very costly.
Yeah, bravo for that, by the way. Yeah. People think that they start to think the machine thinks. It's just dormant. It's responding to human prompts. If the prompts are bad, the data are assessed badly. That's the most important thing. Humanity will win if we allow ourselves to understand we have to hone our wisdom. I want to thank you both for joining us today here on the floor of HIMSS. I know this is an important time to be at this meeting for you, and I think that people who are listening to our conversation right now will benefit greatly. Thanks, and continue to enjoy the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gil. Thank you.
And that, dear listeners, wraps another transformative conversation here on Health Unabashed. A heartfelt thank you to our global audience for joining us and to our guests, Cheryl Pammer, Minitab's Head of Insights, and Mikhail Golovnya, Minitab's Senior Advisory Data Scientist. For more information on their work, go to www.minitab.com and do follow them on LinkedIn as well. Health Unabashed streams live on Healthcare Now Radio Monday through Friday at 10:30 a.m., 6:30 p.m., and 2:30 a.m. Eastern. That's 7:30 a.m., 6:30 p.m., and 11:30 p.m. Pacific. Want to stay connected? Follow Gil at Gil_Bash, and that's BASHE, and me, Greg Masters, MPH, on Twitter, and that's Greg with 2 G's. Do tag your insights or feedback using the hashtag HealthUnabashed. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep raising your voice with no apologies.